We went into the season with hope, with optimism, and feeling good about the future of Boston College football. And in just one game, all of that has come crashing down.
You are Locked On Boston College, your daily podcast on the Boston College Eagles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome. This is Locked On Boston College. I am your host, AJ Black. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All right, folks. This is not the type of episode that we were expecting, as we had quite the weekend. BC opened up their season on Saturday and looked bad, as they fell to NIU 27-24 in overtime. We have Mitch on here to talk about it. Mitch, how are we hanging in?
I guess about as good as can be expected given the context. Again, we got bit by another week one terrible game where we both predicted BC to win comfortably, and they did the exact opposite.
So yeah, today we're going to talk about three things. We're going to break this episode up into two parts. We're going to do one today. We're going to do one tomorrow. If you're looking to talk about the quarterback, that's coming up tomorrow, because we're going to get into the game piece today. We have a whole episode about Thomas Castellanos versus Emmett Morehead and what's going on there just for tomorrow. All right.
I've got a Deion Sanders sermon ready for tomorrow, so make sure you tune in for that.
Ooh, I can't wait for that one. So let's just dive into what happened on Saturday. You had a team that had all summer long, 10 months to get ready after a dismal 2022 season. They looked last year like a team that just needed a reboot. Hafley goes out. He fires his offensive coordinator. His defensive coordinator ends up in the NFL. He hires 45 other coordinators or whatever he hired, right? He goes out, grabs 10 transfers. You're feeling good coming out of camp. You talk to the players. They're feeling energized. And they came out flatter than Coke that you leave on your, deck for 3 weeks. They didn't look interested at all. And so NIU, to their credit, punched them in the mouth early with a touchdown. BC on offense seemed to not have any clue what was going on. They seemed to forget that the season has started. They looked disinterested. They were a mess. We had quarterbacks going in and out, as Emmett Morehead had happy feet. Hafley yanked him after 2 series. Castellanos comes in. Let's talk about this first half, Mitch. It was a disaster.
7-0. I think the biggest, quote, disaster is really BC's offense, because if you look at the defense, allowing 7 points in the first half is not bad, especially if you think about that drive. It came down to that 1 third down conversion where it was 3rd and 2, and Northern Illinois sends out their jumbo goal line package and they hit them with a deep play action, hard play action off it, which is like, that's bad, but you can kind of not forgive it, but you understand why that happens. And then they're in the red zone, they run the ball, they get some good plays, and they get in the end zone. So the first half, I'm like, okay, the defense is playing well. They're getting a lot of push into the backfield. They're doing a decent job of stymieing the run. Like, when we look at the numbers and looking at his performance, like, aside from that one throw on the hard play action and the one play where he was almost sacked and just flicked it forward and the guy had a huge gain, Rocky Lombardi was not very good. He had, like the 2 BC quarterbacks, he had sub 50% completion. If you adjust it for drops, it actually just goes up to 50 exactly. He missed a lot of wide open throws. But the thing is, I think the biggest difference, and this is what I think the game came down to, is that NIU wanted to rely on the run game, and for some reason BC didn't, even though they were pretty successful doing so.
I want to talk about that.
Yeah, that was something that once it was like 21-7, you kind of have to throw to win. But in the first half, I don't know why they kept going back to throwing the ball. And obviously some of it was drops. You had 2 really bad drops by George Takis and Jaden Williams that killed drives. But BC ran the ball really well. I mean, so there's this website called Game on Paper, which does a really good job of compiling advanced statistics. So BC's EPA per rush, so expected points added per rush, was 0.21, which that would have been in the 81st percentile of any team's performance in FBS versus FPS games from 2022. So that was really good. Their success rate for when rushing the ball. So essentially, do you generate positive EPA? Are you, if it's, instead of yards per carry, it's like, if you get 2 yards on 3rd and 1, that's much better than, 5 yards on 3rd and 15. So B6 success rate rushing the ball any down was 56%. So that even though NAU has a pretty decent run defense, BC was pretty much getting the looks they wanted running the ball, and they were having success. And especially when you compare it to last year when they couldn't get anything going on the ground, Pat Garrett was getting 4 to 6 yards a carry. Obviously you have Castellanos on that big run on his first play, but it wasn't just these big highlight, explosive plays. It was pretty consistent. They were getting yards. They were getting push on NIU's defensive line, and they would just abandon it to keep throwing the ball. And I just didn't understand that decision at all, because I think with this offensive line that you wanted to showcase them being so much better, you could have relied on them so much more. There's another stat that I really like. So they have a stat on this website called Game on Paper called offensive line yards. Essentially, how much can the offensive line be credited for generating those yards? BC's offensive line yards were 63.5 in this game. I went back and looked at the Rutgers game from last year. It was 9 offensive line yards. So a 7 times improvement from week 1.
And that was just by running the ball. If they continued running, it would have been up exponentially.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I still believe, like, in general, passing the ball is more efficient than running the ball, but you go with what's working, and that's going to be more efficient. And even in the passing game, we saw the offensive line give both quarterbacks tons of time to throw. I think they said that PFF had it as the quarterbacks being pressured on 10 dropbacks out of 42 total. So less than 25%. Last year, it was in the 40%. And if you look at BC's offensive line on the blocking stats, there were only 3 pressures credited to them. So those other pressures were by the quarterback holding the ball for super long. And obviously the offensive line had some penalties, and that's something else we can talk about. But that was just something that I didn't understand, especially in the first half when the game was close and there wasn't really anything going, especially in the passing game. Just lean on the run game. You've got a decent stable running backs. The offensive line is getting a good lean on the defense. Just keep going with that. And then that will help open up the passing game more. So that was something that was really frustrating for the first half.
Yeah. And in a moment, we'll get into the second half of the game and talk about when BC kind of turned things around a little bit, but still the errors, the mistakes, they all came back to bite the Eagles in this one and cause, it ended up with a loss. So we'll get into that in just a moment. Now, I am a fan of Athletic Brewing Company. They have completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good. They're full of flavor, well-crafted, just like a full-strength beer. I love their IPAs. No alcohol, but they are tasty. They taste just like any IPA you would find at your local brewery. They're constantly releasing limited edition experimental styles to add to their variety, and no hangovers ever. So first-time customers, go use promo code Locked On to get 15% off your first online order. Again, that's code Locked On at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer, exclusion, and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. All right, this is Locked On BC, AJ Black, here with Mitch. If you guys want to join Eagle Insider, perfect time to do it. We've been diving in. Poor Mitch is going to have to watch this game a second time, I think.
I've already started.
And pray for Mitch. That's how you should not be spending your Labor Day. As I said, if you follow me on Eagle Insider, I drew the lucky straw here this week where I had a wedding the first weekend of college football season. So if I sound kind of funny, it's because I forgot my microphone. So I'm talking into my my microphone on my computer. But we're here. I could not do this episode tonight. And by the comments and the listeners that we have, it seems like a lot of people want to hear us talk about it. So the second half, we're going to save the quarterback conversation for later, but Emmett Morehead comes back out, does nothing. But then Thomas Castellanos, he figures some stuff out. He starts to make some plays. He starts to do some things. Mitch, give me some of your thoughts on what happened in the second half.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it rests on Castellanos' ability to make plays both with his legs and with his arm. He's obviously a smaller package player in terms of being listed at 5'10", 190, 195, but he's obviously an incredible athlete. Even in the first half, he was able to make guys miss and make something out of nothing, which is huge. And then once he finally started settling down, like the interception he threw that was in the second half too. That was just god awful. But later on, he had those two dimes to yards. Sorry,
I said he underthrew him by about 5
that was
yards.
Really bad. But those dimes to O'Keefe and Jaden Williams to get the touchdown were great. Him sitting in the pocket to throw that touchdown to Lewis Bond was good. This is kind of what I saw when I watched him, and again, it was limited snaps against it when he was at UCF, but you saw the talent jump off the page. But it's just like this guy needs more reps, and you could kind of see like the way he made decisions as to where he was throwing and who he was throwing to in the first half, just sailing some passes. The other thing, and Mark Herzlich brought this up a lot in the broadcast, is he mentioned that a lot of the receivers seemed to be running sluggishly, and later in the game that he attributed that to being tired, which BC had to throw to win. They had to run routes downfield. So I get being a little gassed at that point. But early in the game, he was mentioning this. And the only thing that makes sense to me as to why that was happening is that the receivers didn't know what routes they were running. They were unsure and therefore not playing as fast as they could. So that's a concerning variable to me. And that's just based on the broadcast and something that Herzlich noted. And Herzlich has his moments of being good and being bad as a commentator, but there's some things that he picks out and that you can tell like from his playing experience. It's like, okay, this is real and this matters. And I thought that was really important. And on the defensive side, it was kind of the same story as we saw last year. They're on the field too much. I think they were on the field for 84 total plays.
36 minutes.
80 plays and then a few more with penalties. So, this was something I talked about in a thread on one of the posts later this week, is that I think BC ideally wanted to get that number down closer to like 65 because they averaged 70 last year, which last year, obviously, they were on defense a ton and they were on the field 10 more plays and it was only one drive of overtime. So I don't think that matters. But yeah, they were on the field so much. NIU was able to, as they kept it going, they were able to get some more success running the ball. They were able to lean on BC's defensive line a little more. So yeah, I mean, that's the frustrating, like the first drive coming out of the half where NIU just went right down the field and scored a touchdown to make it 14-0. That was pretty annoying, pretty pathetic in terms of effort. They come back, they get the fumble and the punt. That's good. And then NIU gets another touchdown to go up 2 scores. And that's where the penalties started happening. And I think that's partially frustration, partially just, again, being tired from being out there so long. So you had that first one on Elijah Jones, which gave NIU a first down on 4th and 6. They scored later. And then later in the game,
Ezraku.
They had that series of plays where it was back-to-back third downs where they had the first found Ezraku, which I get you can't touch the quarterback and you want, and Ezraku has had a few of these before. So maybe they do need to coach him a little harder on kind of tailing off. But I mean, I think that's really hard because like he's a pass rusher. His job is to get the quarterback, and he gave the quarterback the lightest of taps. And Rocky Lombardi made the veteran move of flopping and drawing that foul. And then the penalty on Cheek on the next third down was a fair call. But yeah, and Herzlich mentioned that too. Just this is how BC plays. They're aggressive. They play aggressive man coverage. And Cheek had some nice plays earlier by being aggressive. So, that's again something where it's hard to decide how you want to approach that, because obviously you don't want penalties, but you want your guys to be playing hard, playing aggressively, and going after the receiver and going after the ball. Luckily, BC was able to get out of that drive by stopping NIU, and they got a touchdown the next drive and kept it going. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the defense, I think it's a lot of the same story as last year. The defensive line not being able to get much pressure was frustrating. But then again, I think some of that was there were few opportunities where it wasn't a, quick pass to the flat or a play action boot or something where it's like, it's the part of the like true drop back thing where there's going to be certain plays that are drop back passes, but there's not really going to be an opportunity for the passer to actually make an effect on the quarterback. So that was kind of frustrating to see them not really get as much pressure on Lombardi as we thought. But again, I the biggest thing that surprised me was just how many drops the wide receivers had. And, there was obviously times when the quarterbacks missed them pretty badly. But if you look at, this is the PFF, we're going back to PFF stats. So Thomas Castellanos, he actually had all the drops when he was a quarterback, and he had 6 drops. And when you take that as a percentage of catchable throws from Thomas Castellanos, that is 31.6% of his catchable throws were dropped.
That's crazy.
So PFF also has this stat called the adjusted completion percentage, and that essentially takes out drops and throwaways. So essentially, how accurate is the quarterback being? So Castellanos' regular completion percentage was 44.8%. His adjusted completion percentage, when you take out drops, take out throwaways, it goes up to 67.9%.
Wow.
So I don't know what the receivers, I don't know what they need to do to get their heads on straight, but Joseph Griffin, Jaden Williams, and George Takis need to do something different, because that can't happen again. Because that
some of those passes too, like the one, I think it was one of the interceptions that bounced off of Takis.
Yeah,
like right on the numbers.
He had that one. There was one earlier where there was 2nd and 6, and they hit him perfectly on an RPO slant, and he just dropped it. Jaden Williams wide open on a slant underneath, dropped it. I know Lewis Bond had a drop at one point, but I would say, and I know Jaden Williams came back with a catch, but Bond caught 4 of his 8 targets. I know at least one of them was way off the mark. He dropped another one, but he had a pretty solid day. But Jaden Williams only caught 9 of 2 targets. I don't know how many of those were catchable off the top of my head, but his one drop was at 33%. So I'm guessing 3 of his 9 targets were uncatchable, which is, again, that's bad. But, and then Joseph Griffin was essentially a non-factor, because the only thing they could really do for him was use him as a penalty drawer late in the game. Other than that, he was essentially completely erased. And I'm wondering if he might not be as healthy as we've been led to believe coming off that off-season surgery he had in his knee. So, and I do want to say this other thing. I don't, aside from not running the ball, I did like the design of the offense, because like I said, they were running the ball pretty well. They used a good variety of run concepts, and then were receivers open. They just weren't catching the ball. So,
right.
And obviously there's a good bit of the comeback is due to Thomas Castellanos just making insane plays after insane plays, like the scramble on 4th and 5 where he scrambled for about 20 seconds, ran backwards about 30 yards. I mean, that stuff you can pull on NCAA, the video game, on rookie difficulty, not in a real football game. So,
yep.
But I mean, it's another extremely disappointing way to start the season. Now your thoughts move to Holy Cross next week. And granted, I thought Holy Cross was getting a little overhyped as a team that could beat BC, because I thought some of their wins last year were fluky. They beat Fordham in double overtime. They win on a Hail Mary against Buffalo. And then when they came up against South Dakota State, the national champion, they got their butts whooped pretty much. So yeah, I mean, that's a really concerning game. And I do want to say this about NIU. I do think that they had a similar issue to BC last year, where they had a lot of quarterback injuries, like BC had a lot of offensive line injuries. In 2021, they did win the MAC, and I'm doing air quotes. Obviously, this is a podcast, so you can't see them, but they had a negative point differential that season. They had a lot of close wins, so they would have come back to earth in 2022 and probably been about 500 if not for the quarterback injuries. So that was kind of hard to predict how they would do, but essentially at the end of the day, they were able to keep drives alive by keeping the ball ahead of the chains, by running the ball consistently very well. And they, especially on offense, they made some key 3rd down plays, whereas BC didn't. And I'm not really sure I'm ready to say NIU's defense did anything spectacular, because I thought BC's the BC offensive players more so than I would say like the coaches and design or whatever, gave them a lot of opportunities to make their defense look good. I thought the players, and when they interviewed him going into the fourth, they essentially said, I think he said, our players have to execute, which is the nice way of saying our guys need to get their crap together and do what they're supposed to. Because and he was right. Like there were guys in position to make plays, especially on offense, and they just didn't. The drops, Castellanos making mistakes, Emma Moorhead making mistakes. We'll dive into the whole quarterback thing tomorrow, but it hurt. Like we talked about, kind of how does NIU win this game? BC's receivers just completely crapping the bed was not something I really considered, because it's just like, I was like, the likelihood that these receivers are just dropping wide open passes, it seems very unlikely. And of course it happened, so that's how well our prognostication goes.
Right. Yep. And we're not going to talk about my picks of the week last week, which are solid 0-4. And that's why I don't bet. Now, in our final segment, we talked about the inability to execute and some of the issues that were going on that were, a lot of it was player related with penalties and drops. I want to look at the whole system of what went into this game, the whole philosophy, and what seemed like a complete lack of, I don't know what I want to call it, a lack of preparation, which is what I titled this, but what went into this, because it just seems like, and we'll talk about the quarterback piece, but it just seemed very hodgepodge, and we'll get into that in just a moment. This is Locked On BC. I'm your host, AJ Black, and I'm joined by Mitch Wolf. If you want to head over to Eagle Insider, we have 50% off right now. If the season keeps going down the wrong tubes, you might get other news where we can talk about. If it goes well, hey, we'll talk about that too and all the positives that go along. You can't lose. Come on over. It's a price of a cup of coffee, and we'll have a lot. It's gonna be an interesting season. We'll leave it at that. So you had this game that just seemed. I want to say that for me, when I watch Boston College football under Jeff Hafley, and I've watched them for a number of years now, this is year 4. If you were to ask me, what is the identity of this team? I have no idea. I don't know what they do well. I don't know what he's trying to do. Well, I guess I know what he's trying to do, but he says he wants to run the ball, but he abandoned that in 3 drives? I look at this and this game just seems so hodgepodge, where you went from power running to a mobile quarterback to quarterbacks going back and forth to all these different issues that are going on. It seems sloppy. I want to use that as the word for this. It just seems sloppy all around, and from players to coaching.
Yeah. Sloppy, directionless. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that was, like I said earlier, BC had an opportunity to establish an identity as a running team with this game, especially early before things kind of got out of hand. And again, running the ball, give the defense more rest. They're able to execute better, and that might change the result. But yeah, I mean, at this point, especially and again, we'll talk about the quarterback thing tomorrow, but this is really a program with no wind in their sails. It's just, I'm not sure what's going on. In terms of guys, just it's week 1, so there are going to be some mistakes. So, the offensive line having a few false starts here and there. I feel like, especially with guys, like I like Mahogany, who's playing first time he's been on a football field playing real meaningful football since, you could argue, winter of 2021. So you're gonna have those mistakes, and that's like I can stomach that during week 1, but really just, I mean, the drops just absolutely, because again, there were so many times where guys, I'm not even thinking of contested catches, which there were a few of those with Joseph Griffin and George Takis, but times where guys were just wide open in key situations, and they just kept dropping the ball, and then BC just kept coming back to the passing game. And when you're switching out quarterbacks or introducing a new quarterback, it's like, well, I feel like you can make the job easier by running the ball. And by the time, again, by the second half, the NIU defense figured out, hey, BC, and that's kind of when Castellanos kind of went off a little bit, but they were saying, hey, we don't believe BC can beat us through the air, so we're going to load up the box and stop the run. And that's where, when BC did try to run a little bit later in the game, they were having a little more struggles because NIU didn't have to respect BC's passing game. So I mean, this is a really, 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 really frustrating loss. And there's a lot that needs to be fixed before Holy Cross next week. And then, getting the ACC play is a very scary thing to think about with how this team performed on Saturday.
Right. Yeah. I mean, right now, when you look at the way that team played, the way that just the game flowed.
I do, with kind of before you want to say that, I think we do need to give credit to the team, and mostly on Castellanos, for storming back and finding a way to tie this game and get it to overtime. That is at least somewhat encouraging. But in terms of what this team wants to do on both sides of the ball and like establishing games to win where they don't need to have comebacks like this, that's where I'm not sure where this is going. I would say I'm glad to see that they fought and came back in a pretty unlikely scenario, but there's still much more that needs to get fixed.
Right. And when you have Florida State in 2 weeks and you watch some of these wide receivers that they have and you're going, oh God, how are they going to do anything? And you get Jared Verse bearing down on, a 5'10" Thomas Castellanos. You're going, oh boy. So tomorrow's episode, part 2, we didn't even touch the quarterback piece. We have a lot to talk about, and my thoughts on where things are with Emmett Morehead. I have a lot of thoughts about this, and I want to kind of get it out vocally with Mitch. Mitch will be back on. What Thomas Castellanos can bring. We're going to talk about him and where the BC future needs to go at quarterback. Do we go back to Morehead? Because Hafley after the game said he didn't know, which is worrisome. Again, just say it if you think Thomas Castellanos did enough. Whatever. And then later this week, we're going to have Tom Devitt on from Friends of the Heights. We'll have him on, and then we're going to preview Holy Cross. So we got a lot going on this week. And there's so much to go on with this that I didn't even talk about the ACC bringing on Stanford, SMU, and Cal. I didn't even put that in the top 3 things I wanted to talk about. So that's a whole other thing. Maybe I'll do a bonus episode this week if I have the time. I don't know. I've got a lot. So
it's more teams. It's, it helps the ACC and was it the Directors Cup standings.
Yep.
And, maybe BC can have some fun road trips to warmer locales later in the year or something. But, right. I don't know how much they're, and none of them are really taking any money. So, good for them, but I don't really know what
Florida State's still complaining about it. So
of course they are,
the money's supposed to magically just show up for them.
Listen, with the way the ACC kowtows to Notre Dame, who's not even in the conference, why would we expect anything different from them towards a member that is an actual member of the conference? And it does generate probably the most, if not the second most revenue of teams that are actually in the conference. So, I think the ACC was dealt a pretty bad hand, but I still think that they've found a way to kind of mismanage this. And at this point, I think it is just a time delaying tactic until Florida State and Clemson finally get up out of here.
Yep.
So it's, we got a lot to talk about.
We do have a lot to talk about. So, Mitch, where can people find you?
You can find me at Mitchell T. Wolf, WOLFE, on Twitter. I am currently working my way through rewatching the game. I think I finished the first half, so I'm going to get to the second half later tonight, and then ideally have the write-up ready for Tuesday, I'm hoping. But I'll probably have to rewatch it at least once more, maybe twice more, to kind of fully flesh out my analysis thoughts. But for tomorrow's episode, I think tomorrow's episode is going to be more about my kind of thoughts as a fan as opposed to an analyst regarding the quarterback situation.
All right. So we'll be back. You can follow me on Twitter at AJBlack247. You can follow Mitch at Mitchell T. Wolf, and follow all that work over at Eagle Insider. Thank you all so much, guys. I know it was a tough weekend, but we're hopefully here for some therapy with you. We'll talk about it again tomorrow here on Locked On BC. Take care, everyone.